Okay, so everybody, this is the one of our first podcasts that we're doing behind the Patreon account. What do we call this? After hours
Sure.
or
That
happy
works.
hour? Or we're going to figure out something better to call this thing. But right now, maybe we'll, because after hours, that sounds very seedy. And this is a professional podcast, Mike. So maybe we're going to call this happy hour for now because we are just a couple professionals having a couple bevies over here. But mine's coffee right now because we are recording at 11 in the morning. So if
Yeah,
this was
I have
later,
a 12 o'clock meeting, so I
yeah,
definitely cannot be doing any
no.
bevies. Yeah.
But maybe next time we do enjoy some drinks usually when we're recording. I'll have some tequila next time and you'll have some bourbon, I'm sure, as you do, right? Bourbon or beer, depending on what you got going on. But
More
so
of a bourbon guy. Yep.
okay, so we'll call it happy hour for now. And today I think we're going to talk, this is a reflection on our podcast, episode 5, mentorship, precepting, and the student relations. The reason why we put this behind the paywall is because these are some stories that are, we don't want to be necessarily mainstream out there for everybody here. We think that you, as a Patreon member, deserve to hear a little bit more of the nitty gritty, the fun stories behind, or rather, we can, take our white coats off and get a little bit more comfortable and really talk about what life's all about here. So, Mike, I want to hear
All right.
some good stories. Make me smile, laugh, cry, whatever you want to make me feel. Tell me something funny, good about your relationships as a student or a preceptor, please.
Perfect. So, for listeners, John and I have intentionally not shared these stories with each other. We wanted to make sure that we were all hearing them for the first time so that we could have genuine reaction to them.
Please.
So just to give context, like John said, we're extending this off of our podcast episode about precepting. So I think my back of the napkin math, I've taken about 400 students in my 10 years in medicine. So there's
Oh my
a lot
gosh.
of really good students. There's a lot of, not so great students, but also some really funny stories. So here, we'll start with this story. So I work in psychiatry. We see a lot of, group home patients, patients with developmental disability. So I had a student, this was many years ago. I had a student with me. She was awesome, really good student. And we were working with a patient who had, some pretty profound intellectual disability. He also had impulse control. And we were walking him up to the front desk to check out. And, the little things that you think of, or do as a professional and you don't necessarily think of it. Like if I'm seeing a patient like that, I'm never turning my back to them. I always make sure they walk in front of me. Just little things that, you naturally develop and don't think about. Well, as a preceptor, I apparently failed because I never taught my student how to manage a patient where there's concern for, impulse control or physical disruption. So we were walking this patient up and she turned her back to the patient to get something off the printer, turned around back to hand this to the patient's caregiver, and the patient just sucker punched her right across the face. I mean, Mike Tyson, she was down on the ground. It was really scary and awful at the time. So that's not the funny part of this. Thankfully, she was okay. She was very shaken up. She went home for the day.
She went home for the day,
Yeah,
Mike.
yeah,
What a good guy. Why don't you take the rest of the day off?
I mean, she had a shiner. Like she really got hit. So it was just awful. It was scary. I felt terrible because, like I said, I felt responsible in the sense that I hadn't, trained her or taught her just the little precautions you take with patients like that. So anyway, so thankfully she finished her rotation. She was shaken up, but she did okay. No physical harm. Fast forward a couple months later, this individual had graduated and she was a really good student. So we were looking to hire within our clinic. And I thought to myself, I was like, oh, this student was actually really good. Let me reach out to her and see if she's interested in working for us. So I reached out. It's like, hey, you were just fantastic on your month rotation. I just wanted to gauge your interest. Would you ever want to work here? And she didn't respond for like a good 24 hours. And then her response was, are you serious? ... She goes, you do remember I got assaulted in your clinic? ... And I was like, yeah, that happened, didn't it? And she's like, how could you think I want to work there? And I was like,
it was a hazing ritual. We liked you.
So it's like, maybe I miscalculated the situation. I'm so sorry. So yeah, I mean, like I said, the funny part about that is not necessarily her getting assaulted. That's horrible, but just my my idiocy that I thought she would
No,
want to work at the place where she got assaulted by a patient.
man, I
So,
don't think I've ever had something like that happen.
oh
God.
man, that was bad. So do you want to go? I've got more lined up if you want you tell
I'll
me
just
what you want to do
I'll
next.
sprinkle them in. How about
All
that?
right.
Okay, I'll sprinkle them in. So I'm going to talk about a couple student stories. I'm going to as a student because these are some of my best stories. So one of these was on the ID rotation, and we walk into. You're spending probably 5 to 15 minute consults in rooms, okay, in the hospital beds. So we're rounding. We get to this patient who's got a fungal infection that has been out of control. Uh, they haven't been able to treat it. They've done topicals. We don't want to go to something like caspofungin if you don't have to because it's detrimental to the health and so many drug interactions. So we walk into the room, and I'm with this kid who was hilarious. He was one of my friends in school. I would say acquaintances in school, but once we got in this rotation, I'm like, this guy is hilarious. And we've had a great time in this rotation together. One of the hardest rotations, but we had the best time. We walked in this room, and this patient is kind of out of it. I'm not sure what medications they had him on. So in ID, it's like these doctors, they pretend like the patient's sometimes not even there. They just start talking as though they're like a picture on the wall. Like, you see here, this was drawn by so-and-so. They're experiencing this and this. Talking like it's just a blank piece of paper out in the bed. And they're like, okay, so this patient has a yeast infection. And at this point, you're not thinking a vaginal yeast infection. There's many types of yeast infections. And he's like, okay, let's take a look. And we're gowned up because it was also a C. diff room. We're gowned up, and I'm there with this this other student. And they lift up the patient's gown, and they have a pannus. And if you don't know what a pannus is, it's the extra, I'll say flesh, suprapubic flesh that kind of just folds over the pubic area. And so you have to like fold it up to do any work. So they've got a big pannus, and they flip it up. And let me tell you, Mike, I had never seen anything like this before. It looked like somebody took a tub of cottage cheese and just dumped it in the pubic area. And I looked at that and I was like, oh my God, this is why I got into this. I thought it was great. I thought it was not hilarious because I mean, this is people suffering, but just things you do not expect. Well, let me tell you, the guy next to me did not expect it, and he did not want to see that. He started gagging. He's going, and he started shaking violently. He's like, I gotta go. And he just ran out of the room. And I would love to tell you that was the only time that happened, but I will tell you the next time that happened. Maybe in the next story I tell you, but he ran out of the room, and this was not an experience that was isolated. So please continue on because I'm going to tell you the next one afterwards.
All right, I've got one from when I was a student, so we'll stick with that. So I was in my general surgery rotation, and I was with a med student, real solid dude. Interestingly, he's a psychiatrist now, so he went into mental health as well, and maybe this story will tell you why. So we were in general surgery, and it was a great rotation. The attendings were all super nice. They allowed the students to do a lot. I don't know if from a pharmacy perspective, when you do a surgery rotation as a student, typically your job is to retract. You get to be in on the case, and you're usually just holding back, the tools and retracting. So I don't even remember what the case was, but it was an open abdomen case. So whole belly was opened up, and we were retracting.
Like a washout or something?
Yeah, I don't remember what it was, but it was a big field. And so I was on one side of the table. The other student was on the other side of the table, and then the attending was with us. So there was no residents. And it was just the two students and the attending. And we were working, and this student was wearing glasses. He was blind as a bat. I mean, Coke bottle glasses, could barely see anything. And we're sitting over it, and it's a long case. It was a couple hours. And he started getting sweaty. So he kept having the nurse, dab him, which is completely fine. But you could see him perspiring.
As the PA?
No, this was the third year med student.
Oh, med
So
student. Okay,
he was,
sorry.
it was hot, it was uncomfortable, he was getting sweaty. And then I look up and we're looking down at the surgical field and I see in slow motion his glasses, because
No,
his face was set, his glasses start sliding off his face.
no,
And they fall right into the surgical field.
no.
The surgeon pauses, and then I think, are we allowed to swear on this? This is after
Yes,
hours,
no, you
right?
definitely can
And the
now.
surgeon just goes, "What the fuck was that?" His glasses, this kid's glasses, which are not sterile, are sitting in the patient's abdomen. They fell
Oh,
right in. Moment of silence. No one says anything. And then the student goes, doctor, those are my glasses. Surgeon pulls them out and says, you either are putting these back on your face and we're finishing the case, or you're getting the hell out of my OR.
oh my God.
But it was, I mean, awful. And of course, the patient got antibiotics and all that. So
Yeah.
the patient was okay. But my goodness, that moment of terror, you know how it
Yes.
is as a student. You're
Oh, yeah.
so scared of doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And his glasses just dropped into the surgical field. And the way they dropped, like they weren't just sitting on top, they weren't just right at the incision point. They just went whoop right in. Like, oh my goodness.
Nestling right up to, yeah, the transverse colon was just
right?
snuggling that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So man, that was thankfully it wasn't me, because I'm sure he crapped himself.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Like I was going to tell you, oh my God, you said crapped himself. Okay. I'm going to transition. I'm going to make these quick. I swear I'm not gonna make this a long one. So when I told you about this, I was a colleague of mine, but another student that was with me, we went to another room, completely different day. And there was this patient who was, had dementia, had a UTI, and then had a stage 4 tunneling ulcer, that was sacral ulcer. So if you don't know what that is, it means the ulcer goes all the way to the bone and starts tunneling under the skin up the bone, or up at least into flesh further up. So that was packed, and we go into this room, and the doctor just rolls her over, and like she was just like an animal or something, because she was out of it. And he rolls her over, and immediately, bro, she shits the bed. Like we're all standing in that side, and the doctor just looks at it and goes, "Huh, hand me those napkins." And I give him all these napkins, and he just puts a pile of napkins on their bed. And she's saying things like, "No, doctor, please, no, doctor." But she's out of it. She doesn't she was sedated enough. But as soon as he starts going up into the sacral ulcer and unpacking with his hand, the student again starts shaking and runs back out again. And so this was a common thing. I mean, especially when we saw the wound vac, when we unpacked a wound vac and this guy started going into a seizure as oh man, it was like a 500-pound individual. And when that man started going to a seizure in the ICU, he ran out again. But you mentioned specifically dropping things into a field, and you were glad that it wasn't you. You're glad that you didn't make that big of a mistake. Well, let me tell you, my final presentation.
Oh no.
My most, I was really looking forward to giving my case study on a patient I was following who had HIV, had multiple surgeries, had bilateral knee replacements, and she was a very complicated case, multiple infections. We had her on anaerobic, aerobic, fungal, everything. We had everything on this patient. When you're on HIV medications at the time, there's the heart therapies. I mean, you didn't have a lot of options, and almost everything had drug interactions. So I was like, oh, I've got this patient. I'm going to write them up. I'm going to manage their medication therapies, make recommendations, and this patient's going to come out of here better than they came in. But that's what we think of as students. We think we're going to find something that they don't understand, and these providers are like, no. When I walked in there, I knew exactly what we were going to do. A, B, C. Let's go. Next one. So I get up there and present. Made this power. I mean, it took me weeks to put this PowerPoint together. It was going to be perfect. At the end, I finished. Any questions? No, great job. Thanks. Phew, nothing. Okay. I go in the back of the room and my preceptor, their face, jaw slack, dropped, eyes wide open. She goes, John, come here. So I come and I'm like, never had anything negative said about me on this rotation. It was all good. She goes, do you realize what you just set up there? I said, no. She goes, when you were talking about the reconstructive surgery of the vaginal flap and how we keep on having to place drains, you kept on saying vaginal. You were not saying vaginal. You were saying vaginal the whole time. And we're with the two most respected attendings in IND in this area. And I didn't have anything to say. And I went home defeated that day.
Fantastic.
But now I know I would never say vaginal again.
I mean, you can, but
it's like spelling your name wrong in an application, which is another story. But yeah, those were rough times. But I know you have more. Do you have anything else you want? I mean, we have got a few more minutes. Let's go.
I've got some. So let's stick with. I'm gonna try and one up your panis in the bodily reactions.
Mm-hmm.
So I had another one. I like another.
Do you know your camera's not on, by the way?
Yeah, I turned it off because we're getting
okay.
a little. I think our bandwidth
just making sure. Just making sure. Okay.
Is the audio coming in okay on your end?
Oh, it's fine. Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, you're coming in a little hot on my end, and I don't know if it's a connection issue
I'll back up. We're good.
Okay. Yeah, it might just be the connection. The hotel's like 3 megabytes or something. So anyway, another good story of me failing as a preceptor. So my general rule in medicine, because I work in psychiatry, so I've got patients that I've been seeing for years and years, and we've got wonderful, close relationships that are, longitudinal. And a lot of times I'll have patients that'll bring in food, they'll bring in stuff as a thank you, and it's lovely. It's so wonderful that patients do that. But my general rule is I do not eat things that a patient makes. It has to be sealed and purchased. And the reason that I've learned this is as a young professional, the benefits or the importance of mentorship. When I first got hired in my job, I was shadowing my medical director, and we saw a guy, and wonderful guy, awesome, and he would make his own pickles. So, this was like week 2 on my job. He brings in this whole case of pickles, and my boss is like, oh, take a couple jars home. These are the best pickles you'll ever have. And I was like, oh, yeah, I was all about it. 23-year-old me. Took the pickles home. They were incredible.
And this was before your rule was initiated. This is the reason for your rule.
This is the reason for the rule, right.
Okay. All right.
So a couple months later, I'm, now seeing patients as a PA, and I see this guy. So when I'm seeing him and we're talking, and I told him how great the pickles are, and I'm looking in his chart, and he's a hoarder, and he has 12 cats. So I'm sitting there in my mind, I'm like, all right, I didn't die from the pickles, but what kind of sanitation does a hoarder with 12 cats have in their kitchen when they're making these pickles? So that's when I realized, especially canned food, that, my goodness, the risk of botulism is not worth eating food given by patients. So I appreciate when patients bring stuff. It's such a wonderful gesture, but I won't eat it. I just politely will set it aside if it's homemade and not sealed. So fast forward a couple years, and now I'm precepting, and I've got a student, and a patient brings in homemade, what'd she make? It was some sort of homemade quick bread. And it was lovely of her. My student had it. I set it aside, and my student took it back to the student room. And you know how students are. They're poor, they're broke, they'll eat anything. They devoured this quick bread. So I went into the room. I was like, what happened to that banana bread? They're like, oh, we ate it. It was so good. I was like, oh, well, that patient has mild to moderate dementia. I generally, as a rule, I don't eat anything that's homemade from patients, and I'm not sure cognitively, where she's at. At this time, I think I had 2 or 3 students. All of them got so sick, they called in 2 days in a row after that. They had the worst food poisoning from whatever was in that. So so they learned their lesson too. But once again, I failed as a preceptor. I didn't pass on these little tips and tricks of how to kind of navigate medicine.
Well, I mean, that's kind of you to recognize that you're trying to watch out for your students. But what about the preceptors who don't? So
Food
I
poisoning.
like when I was in the AIDS care clinic, um, again, to reiterate, the AIDS care clinic has been rebranded and now it's trying to be a more of a inclusive family medicine supports LGBTQ plus patients. So it's definitely more inclusive now, but it was primarily only AIDS patients HIV positive patients who had AIDS or were being managed for hepatitis C because there wasn't a lot of hepatitis C clinics. And this is before the new therapies that you have, like, your month to 3 months of treatment and you're pretty much cured or cleared of the hepatitis C. It was the Pegasus trials or the interferon type medications. And so we were meeting with them weekly, sometimes monthly. This one patient came in and we're sitting with him. This is a community that's primarily at the time homosexual, but this one individual who came in, he was very proud of his identifying as a gay man, and he was a very good looking man back in the day. And he had these pictures from when he used to bodybuild and everything. At this point, he had the gut now, but we're sitting in this room, me and two other students with our preceptor, and he starts pulling out pictures. Look at this picture of me when I was younger. And they progressively get more and more like edgy. I'm like, where's this going? The last picture he shows us is him standing completely naked in front of a mirror with a towel in his mouth, and the towel is going down and just hanging above over his genitalia. So you saw everything but that.
That's artful.
But it was from the 80s, though. That's the thing.
Tasteful nudity.
Well, but as a preceptor, at what point do you say, like, okay, Jeff, or whatever his name was, like, that's enough? No, she let him go. And not only did that happen, she goes, okay, so Jeff, why are we here today? He's like, well, I've got this hernia we've been trying to work on. And I had never seen a hernia in the real world before. And she goes, you guys want to see it? And so I was like, yeah, let's go. He pulls up his shirt, pulls down his pants just a little bit. And it was like a lower middle quadrant hernia, but it was protruding out probably 3 inches just there. And I was with a couple pretty girls who were students. And he looks at them and goes, you guys want to touch it? But they were very, I don't say gullible, but they were just like, yes, like women, men, whatever. Yes, men. They were like, okay. And the preceptor didn't stop it. Ungloved, poked it, goes to the next girl, ungloved, pokes it, comes to me. I was like, absolutely not. I'm not touching that. The guy's like, come on. I was like, no, I don't need to touch a hernia. I can imagine what it feels like. I'm okay.
I totally would have touched it.
I mean, maybe gloved.
You got to experience it.
No, I watched them do it, and that was it. I mean, but that's a preceptor who was just like, this is the population that we deal with, everybody. Yes. Get used to it.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Like, you might want to be a professional wearing your 3-piece suit or whatever you want to wear and be like, yeah, I got my graduate degree. No, if you're in a position where that's your clientele, just get to the level, man. Enjoy it. Like, have some fun. I was not ready to be touching hernias and seeing nudity that day.
That's funny.
But yeah, I mean, so many good stories, man. I mean, yeah. I've got still some more time. If you have a little bit more time,
all right,
more stories for me.
I'm gonna give you 2 back to back because they go hand in hand, and then I'll let you try and up it.
Okay,
and then we'll wrap it up. All right. So what I'll finish with is obviously bodily functions happen. That seems to be the recurrent theme of a lot of these stories.
Yeah.
So I had a student who, on day 1 was telling us, because we get a lot of, drug rep lunches in psychiatry. We use a lot of medications. And she had mentioned, I'm gluten-free. I have celiac disease, yada, yada. So we knew that there was these dietary restrictions. we had a lunch one day, and I forget what it was. I think it was like a breaded chicken or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
somehow she accidentally ate something with gluten.
Mm.
So we call a patient back. This is our first patient after lunch. And we go back to my office. So it's me, the patient, and then the student. And you could tell going into the visit. So my visits are generally about 20 minutes long. So they're longer than, most medical appointments because we're talking about things. And the evolution of my students' demeanor and well-being from the start of the visit to the end of the visit, you could tell something was bad.
Mm-hmm.
So like her face started going real pale. You could hear her stomach gurgling and grumbling during the visit. It was audible. You could hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And then she started like really discreetly trying to squeak out farts. So you know how it is where like it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my goodness, my stomach, I gotta let this out. And you're like trying to shift your weight in the chair and you're trying to figure out a way to let it out really quietly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you could see her doing this. I'm watching and I know what she had for lunch. I know that there was concern. She was like, I don't know if this has gluten. I think I may have, eaten something that's going to make me sick. And you could just watch this progress in front of you. So she started ripping them in the
Mm.
visit, and they were not quiet. Like, it would happen, and like the patient and I would exchange looks. Like everyone in the room had this awkward look. Now, the beautiful thing about having three people in the room is you have plausible deniability.
Mm.
If it's just you and the patient and you let one rip, the patient is going to know it wasn't them. So you really are in trouble. At least with three people in the room, it may be awkward and everyone's looking around, but there's plausible deniability. But as soon as the visit ends, I've never seen a student run this fast. She sprints out of the room, goes to the bathroom. I don't see her for another 2 hours before she comes back. She looks like she's on death's door and says, I need to go home. And I was like, yeah, I think you need to. So, so that was great. Along those lines, as we're talking about bodily functions. So if you've had students, I always refer to my students, especially in their first 2 weeks, I call them baby bunnies
Mm-hmm.
because they show up, they're completely useless. They don't know what to do. They wander around like, clueless baby bunnies. So, and when you call them baby bunnies, the students think it's a term of endearment. So it works great where it's kind of like
Mm.
the snickering, somewhat insulting way that we refer to students, and the students don't realize we're using it as an insult. So it works out great. But so I had a baby bunny with me. It was like our first or second day. And we walked a patient up to the checkout desk. And typically, I have my own a room that is dedicated to students. That's where they have all their reading materials. That's where they have their computers for charting. So typically in my clinic, we see a patient. I go back to my office to write my notes. The student goes back to their office to read up on the next patient. So the students are not in my office unless we are seeing patients. So I go back to my office. I've got some GI grumbling or gurgling going on. So I get to my office and I think I'm in a position where I can then, release
Mm-hmm.
the abdominal pressure. So I take care of my bodily needs, let it out, and I hear like a little giggle. And it's like that awkward moment because my back is to the door and I turn slowly around. There's the baby bunny just awkwardly followed me into my office and was standing 3 feet behind me when I let one rip. We sat there for a minute and I said, okay, you can go back to your office now. And she's like, okay, sounds good. And then went back. So everyone
No
farts.
acknowledgement.
Nope, never talked about it. Everyone farts. It happens, but yeah, it's always fantastic when students are following you around awkwardly and you do it.
Oh. Yeah. So something we didn't talk about on the podcast was and I wanted to hit on it, but you sometimes get these students, right? That you have no time, no tolerance. You don't want a student at this time. Maybe you have a lot going on at home, whatever it is. There are times when you just make up bullshit work to get them out of your face. Like, do you know, what do you know about QT prolongation with SSRIs, with first generation psych meds and anti-nausea medication? Because you're going to see it all the time. Let's go. What do you know about it? Nothing?
Right.
All right, go find literature.
Yep.
They're going to be at that for hours, bro. Like,
write a 4 to 5 page summary of the existing literature.
Yes.
Yep.
And I want you to put everything in correct format in citing your sources as well. And then I want you to tell me how you searched it in in PubMed. And I hate that I do that, but sometimes like you do just need to find busy work for people, right? Just send them away. And I wish you could. There's not a great way to know, like, probably a year in advance if you're getting a student, roughly 6 months to a year. And sometimes it's just not a good time. And there's not enough locations for these students to go to. These schools are always struggling to find quality program locations, right, for practice. Man, I don't know how many times you send people out on busy work. You probably have enough work for people to do, but at least let me tell you, in the community pharmacy setting, a lot of these people look at these students as just labor. Like all you are is you go and you work your ass off. So maybe this isn't a funny story. Maybe it's just something that I experienced, but there was a rotation I went on that was supposed to be a corporate administrative clinical growth and operational evaluative rotation. You know what I did this whole rotation, Mike, is I did all the Excel data for the analysts. That's all I did.
Scut work.
It's scut work. Like do you know what a SIG code is? Are you aware okay, so we do shorthand SIGs, right? That are definitely not approved anymore. No, I can't even think of the body that does it all right now. It's who does the tall man lettering? It's not the NIH, is it? It's anyways, it's one of those guys. Well, it's not approved really, but we still use it in all of our pharmacy EMR systems because some of these codes are long and it's helpful. Anyways, so I spent weeks where I was staying up until like midnight or later, just testing their codes that they had just created to make sure that I was just doing experiment lab type work in the EMR system for weeks. And then the only other project I did that I got so much praise for that I think maybe this was the reason why I ended up getting hired and moving up in this area was because I mapped out our market share geographically on local maps. That's what I did. What does that have to do with pharmacy? I was pinning where our locations were, where our competitors were, and how many prescriptions and percentage of market share that we had in those different areas. So I could tell you this location is this far from Walgreens, who makes this much market share percentage on these claims through this insurance company. And they loved it. I get it. It's great market data. But what in the world does that have to do with me learning that stuff? Like, I didn't need to learn that. That's something that you could pick up off of Google and like, okay, when I'm in this job, I need to figure this out. And if maybe marketing doesn't know how to do it, I'll figure out whatever. What bull crap waste of time. And unfortunately, sometimes I do that to people too. So, but dude, we've got so many stories about.
Oh yeah. I think we gotta cut it off. I'm running.
We do have to. But next time we talk, it'll be on what we'll at least call right now happy hour time. We hope that when you do listen to happy hour with us, now we don't want to promote drinking because maybe that would be a problem for some folks, but we're probably going to have a nice little sniffer full of bourbon or tequila or, whatever your drink is. Maybe you want no duals. Maybe you want milk. Maybe you want skim. Maybe you want water. Maybe you want a little bit of Mio in that. Huh? Maybe you want a tea.
Milk happy hour. The Mormons love it.
Ooh, milk happy hour. Yeah, uncaffeinated milk, folks. Make sure you keep that uncaffeinated milk out there. But grab your drink of choice, maybe your snack of choice. We'll sit down. We'll just chat it up. Talk about some funny stories, make each other laugh. And hopefully, if you've got some great stories to share, believe me, I will read them. and I will read them aloud. You can send it to our email. Mike, what's our email again for the podcast?
So if you go to Patreon, White Coats of the Round Table, there's a function to contact us. And then
Mm-hmm.
also what we'll be doing now that we're getting our premium content up and running is we're going to have a private Facebook group that we'll get up and running. And I think that'll be an awesome place for maybe a little bit more unfiltered conversation amongst professionals.
Okay. And maybe I might be able to drop a email location in here at some point. I will probably talk about that in the next episode, or I'll drop it on the Patreon website. So you can click that link to email us directly. And from that point, we will be moving on from this episode of Happy Hour, following episode 5 on mentorship, precepting, and student relationships. We hope to see you on the next Happy Hour. Again, I'm John.
All right, I'm Mike. White Coats of the Round Table. Happy Hour. Where are we going with that?
Yeah, Happy
All
Hour.
right. Until next time.
Have a great day, guys. Bye.